Um, Hello everyone. Hi. I hope everyone is doing well, and I welcome you to the chat. Obviously, today's book is Ta-Nehisi Quotes Between the World and. Sorry, my internet is being very annoying and precarious. So we'll try and get through this without it going on the blink. I think this was such a powerful book. I've been reading some of your questions and hearing what some of you had to say and ask. And, I think everyone feels incredibly moved by this book. And, I said that one of the things that I wanted to do was to try and link books that I choose, have some kind of a connection between them. And obviously this is a letter from a father to a son, which has a bit of a connection to Ocean Vuong's book, which was a letter from a son to a mother. And one of the things that I think is the most powerful about this book is that it is this deep yearning to protect his son. And I think what was sort of the most compelling and overwhelming sort of takeaway from this book is that just the amount of fear and the amount of suffocation that being the victim of a racist society or where this systemic racism exists is how much it strangles people and their ability to dream and their ability to see and their ability to try and move forward. And I think that was one of the most, really heartbreaking things, when Ta-Nehisi talks about a third of his energy was constantly engaged in this strive for, making sure that he's safe at every turn and who's going to, threaten him and threaten his body. And he talks a lot about the protection of his body and the plundering of bodies. And I just, it's just so sad that for so many people in this world that so much of their energy and their existence is taken up in this struggle to survive. And it was also quite interesting, I am not American, and obviously this is a very American book, and it's so particular to that place. But I do think of this idea of race being a construct. There's lots of passages I want to read from this, but there's a couple of questions that people have asked, and I've chosen a couple. But I grew up in a very small village in the middle of the country that was exclusively white. But I grew up with this other type of othering where the division was sort of, are you Catholic and are you Protestant? And it's so funny, I think in society, we always try to divide ourselves and we always try to tribalize. But the difference is in this systemic, when it's a systemic problem of this idea that you have to keep a group of people down to have these other people feel like they have the dream. And this whole idea of dreamers was very, very powerful. And this idea of what is this dream that people have and what is it based on and who is it at the expense of. And I remember when I first moved to America, and I love America, and don't get me wrong, this is not anything bashing America. I lived there for 13 years. It has given me so much, and I fully believe I will live there again. But it was very interesting coming there and realizing that there was this underbelly, because I think we all grew up with watching the TV shows and watching, you know, the allure of what America is, and like the riches and the abundance and the positivity and all of those great things that are very real in America, but that there is this other side and this other underbelly, and it's not for everyone. And I think that was something that was really just so potently described. Anyway, I don't know, I always feel so weird with this. I sort of like come here and then I launch into a chat and it's to myself, and then I get to a point where I'm like, and I'm sitting here talking to myself and it feels weird. And I'd love if this was like an open dialogue where I could engage properly and you could ask questions and coming back. I'm going to go through the first question. I want to take some questions from live, but so this question, I hope also for our hard of hearing listeners that you can see my mouth properly. I'm trying to give it a broader view, so my mouth isn't covered by the comments and messages. So Jessica Desana wanted to know which part of the book touched you the most. I guess it can feel very much like you're trapped within that system and that you don't really get the opportunity to see outside of it. I mean, I don't know if that's changing so much, but I know years ago the amount of Americans who held passports was, I think it was quite low. So anyway, I'm going to read bits from sections that I feel like answer the questions. I remember sitting in my 7th grade French class and not having any idea why I was there. I did not know any French people, and nothing around me suggested I ever would. France was a rock rotating in another galaxy, around another sun, in another sky that I would never cross. Why precisely was I sitting in this classroom? The question was never answered. I was a curious boy, but schools were not concerned with my curiosity. They were concerned with my compliance. I loved a few of my teachers, but I cannot say that I truly believed any of them. Some years after I'd left school and after I'd dropped out of college, I heard a few lines from Nas that struck me. Ecstasy, coke, you say it's love, it is poison. Schools where I learn they should be burned, it is poison. That's exactly how I felt back then. I sensed the schools were hiding something, drugging us with false morality that we could not see, so that we did not ask. Why, for us, and only us, is the other side of free will and free spirits an assault upon our bodies? This is not a hyperbolic concern. When our elders presented school to us, they did not present it as a place of high learning, but as a means of escape from death and penal warehousing. Fully 60% of all young black men who drop out of high school will go to jail. This should disgrace the country, but it does not. And while I couldn't crunch the numbers or plumb the history back then, I sensed the fear that marked West Baltimore would not be explained by the schools. Schools did not reveal truths, they concealed them. And I think that, at least to me, is heartbreaking. That we're not teaching people to think and be open and believe in possibilities, that we're teaching people to be compliant. I think that's really quite a shame. There was another part to this that I thought this is another part that spoke to me. It's about when he was in Paris. It spoke to me because Paris is the first place that I moved to when I left Ireland. And I remember feeling so, I guess, you're unmoored in a way because you don't speak the language. It's not your country. There's sort of things you don't recognize. But I remember feeling so excited. But when I hear his recollection and why he had this moment of loneliness, I thought it was just so, it's just really got me. So I walked to Le Jardin de Luxembourg. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon. I took a seat. The garden was bursting with people, again in all their alien ways. At that moment, a strange loneliness took hold. Perhaps it was that I had not spoken a single word of English the entire day. Perhaps it was that I had never sat in a public garden before, had not even known it to be something that I wanted to do. And all around me there were people who did this regularly. It occurred to me that I really was in someone else's country, and yet in some necessary way I was outside of their country. In America, I was part of an equation. Even if I wasn't a part I relished, I was the one the police stopped on 23rd Street in the middle of a workday. I was the one driven to the Mecca. I was not just a father, but the father of a black boy. I was not just a spouse, but the husband of a black woman, a freighted symbol of black love. But sitting in that garden for the first time, I was an alien. I was a sailor, landless and disconnected, and I was sorry that I had never felt this particular loneliness before, that I had never felt myself so far outside of someone else's dream. Now I felt the deeper weight of my generational chains, my body confined by history and policy to certain zones. Some of us make it out, but the game is played with a loaded dice. I wished I had known more. I wished I had known it sooner. So yeah, that I thought was one of the biggest tragedies, I think, of when people grow up without the idea of possibility and without the idea of seeing their life as a singular thing, not as a part of a system. I often talk, people talk so much about white privilege, and you know, if they're not wealthy and they're like, well, I don't have white privilege and I didn't grow up with a lot of money or things. And it's not about that. It's about the fact that, you know, even when you grow up in these parts of the world where it's tribal, and whether you're Catholic or Protestant or Irish or English or Scottish or whatever it is, it's not the first thing people see. You have an opportunity at least to like say your name, state your case before people find those things out about you. And so it's about this idea that from the minute you walk outside your door, you are judged. And that, I think, must be the most exhausting and the most terrifying thing. And he talks about it, you know, you have to be twice as good. You have to be twice as good. And that idea that you have to be twice as good to achieve anything is just, it's a shame. This is sort of two people were asking, well, more than two people were asking the same thing. So this is Amanda W. and Amanda HW and Senoritav. And they want to know my thoughts on telling this story in a letter from father to son. Well, I mean, it just makes it all the more poignant and heartbreaking. And when you realize that this is a generation after generation, that fathers are so concerned with the safety not only of their sons or daughters' bodies, but by their soul, by their spirit, by how much they get to dream or feel or experience. You know, I don't know that anyone else can fully understand what that must be like. You know, this is part of why, you know, I always say it, this is part of what I love about reading, is that you really get an insight to someone else's life experience. And one of the things that just, you know, was so palpable was the suffocation and the anxiety and the fear that comes across in this, and what that must feel like to know that you're responsible for this little life that's come into the world. And you know, how would they feel, and how are they going to survive? And you know, when you look at his friend Prince, and Dr. Jones, I believe, is his mother, you know, you do everything right, you work so hard, you get your education, you go to the good schools, you give your kid every opportunity, and that's still not enough. And so I'm going to go back and read some parts of it that I felt really reflected this question. Page 21. And this I thought was, I really liked this part. And I felt in this a cosmic injustice, a profound cruelty, which infused an abiding, irrepressible